Three. Good morning, everybody. I am Amma Marston. For those of you who don't know me, I'm a mission-driven leader, a strategist, and the author of a book on transformative resilience. This sunny morning, I have the pleasure of talking to Kyra Peralte, who is a tech entrepreneur, a game developer, mother extraordinaire, and the founder of the Traveling Diary Tour, which we're going to hear more about. And I had reached out to Kyra after learning about all the amazing work that she's doing, because it spoke to me in terms of how much she has kind of gone through and embodied a process of transformative resilience, both in her work as an entrepreneur, but also in responding to the pandemic. So Kyra, thank you so much for taking time to talk with me. I just felt that there was so much you had to teach others or share about, how we adapt, how we learn, how we grow through challenging times. And I guess to set the backdrop for people, as well as myself, I'd love to know more about your entrepreneurship. I know that you have been a tech entrepreneur and a founder more than once. And I'd love to hear some of the lessons that you learned from that and how that kind of set the stage then for the pandemic.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Alma, for reaching out. Um, I, I try to always think of like where to start whenever I have to explain my journey, because I have so many different experiences that led me to start different projects. But when it comes to entrepreneurship, I ended up taking on new projects from having pain points that I was particularly interested in trying to solve for. And my last entrepreneurship journey with being in the real estate tech space happened from being in the real estate space and just finding some pain points there and tackling it. And then the pandemic hit. And so with that came a lot of shifts that needed to happen and adjustments that I also needed to make as a tech founder and as a mom, just being at home, just wearing a lot of different hats at the same time or trying to get things done. The Traveling Diary was something that came out of that because of the need for an outlet and also the desire to connect with other people and understand what they were experiencing at the same time.
So before we go forward, I'm going to draw a little bit more out about your tech experience and founder experience, because I know that you've shared some lessons elsewhere and also talked about being a tech founder and woman of color and some of the barriers and prejudices, as well as possible opportunities and the perspective that gives you. So could you just maybe share a little bit more about what you were grappling with maybe or learning just prior to the pandemic, and then how you had to adapt in that project before it also led you to other changes?
Yeah. So getting into the tech space without being someone that is a coder, without being someone that has access to this network of folks that can just write checks for you and give you money to go off and complete your endeavors. A lot of the challenges came with just trying to make sure that I understood what the learning curve was, what my gaps were in my knowledge base, and pursuing those courses or figuring out what types of relationships I needed to build in order to help fill some of those gaps so that I could become more successful and make progress along the way. That wasn't easy. I think it takes, as a lot of folks will tell you in the entrepreneurship space, is that the main part of the journey is about yourself and just taking a look inside and just trying to grapple with the voices on the inside so that you can deal with the forces on the outside. As a newbie tech founder getting into the space, yes, I had the challenges of that comes with that, but being a woman of color, being a woman, as well. And then also not being a coder,
Yeah.
but you're in the tech space. I had to do things like go and take classes so
Mhm.
that I can learn how to code, just so that I can understand some of the language that was
Mhm.
being spoken to me, dealing with some of the condescending comments or
Mhm.
statements, from folks that you've even hired
Mhm.
to help
Mhm.
you.
Mhm.
Um, and then also with the networking piece, being able to put myself out there and giving myself a chance in spaces
Mhm.
that I wasn't used to being in, and in spaces where a lot of times I was the only person in the room that looked like me.
Mhm. Mhm.
I observed a lot. I took a lot of notes
Mhm.
about what I was seeing. I also learned from what I was watching and what I
Mhm.
endured. And I had, luckily, mentors in my corner that I could go to and talk to and say, hey, I felt this way when they said that to me.
Mhm.
Um, or what other things should I be looking at in this situation? What blind spots
Mhm.
do you see as I explain to you where I am?
Mhm. Mhm.
And luckily, just being able to have folks around me where I could do that, that could help give advice to
Mhm.
help me along the way, I was really, really lucky to just be able to get that type of guidance. I
Mhm.
know that not a lot of people have that
Mhm.
in their world. But that's one of the things that I really truly encourage. And it does take telling yourself sometimes that you're just gonna step back from some of the old ways of looking at things and just
Mhm.
giving yourself a chance at seeing them differently.
Mhm. So it sounds like you've done a lot of kind of adapting, continuing to learn, building new skills, but also really reinforcing your own core. It sounds like in terms of the doubts, especially if there's a lot of pushback externally or lack of opportunity or some of the kind of biases, sometimes outright prejudices. So what I'm hearing is really actually a lot of the core skills of transformative resilience, though that's often on my radar. But really, it sounds like you went through a process of learning about yourself and reinforcing that core while also building external skills like greater networking, the ability to adapt based on the landscape, based on the feedback on your product, learning coding, etc. So that sounds like quite a strong base, although not necessarily easy, from which you were working when the pandemic hit. So
Yeah.
you had started to explain a bit about that. Tell me what that was like, um, and how it may or may not have kind of shaken up your world personally, professionally, in terms of community.
Yeah. So when the pandemic hit, so imagine going through that process of just trying to adapt, get to know yourself, understand yourself better, addressing some of your own personal weaknesses.
Mm,
And then the pandemic hits, and you're in this space where you're going through that process, but now you're having to navigate it and engage virtually only.
mhm,
And in doing and having that pressure, and trying to figure out how to do that in a way that is virtual, to engage with folks, but still human.
mhm,
Because at the same time, you're grappling with some very different realities than the folks that are on the other side of the screen may be going through, right?
mhm,
And so that adds another layer of stress, excuse me, another layer of stress and another layer of, it gives you another challenge to be authentic,
mhm,
to become more aligned with who you really are, um, and transparent in a way that also makes you feel like you're taking a big risk
mhm,
um, in the amount of transparency, because the world wasn't used to uh, accepting certain things already
mhm,
about moms,
mhm,
parents being home,
mhm,
added to the other perceptions that you're trying to manage as a founder, putting yourself out there, to prove your product, to prove your solution, and to persuade people to be a part of your team.
Mhm, mhm,
All of that working together
mhm,
um, it was a lot. It was a
mhm.
lot. And just being able to manage that while, stirring pots of oatmeal. um,
Like, yes, please invest. Don't mind
yeah,
while the oatmeal bubbles up.
exactly. It was a lot. It was a lot.
Mhm,
And so what it did was, at that time, it made me say, "Hey, uh, it's almost like you could see like the world crumbling all around you, right?"
mm,
Um, and you say, "Okay, well, this I could see this as an opportunity to just break down and say, oh my
mhm,
gosh, like the world is coming to an end, everything is lost, everything is gone."
mm,
Or I can say, I could look at it as the world is crumbling. Okay, I have the opportunity to create a new one for
mm,
myself.
mhm,
And so if I see it that way, okay, well, what's the first thing I need to do? Okay, well, the first thing I think I need to do is take a look at myself, examine myself. What are my values? Like,
mm,
what's precious to me? What is it that I want to keep? If
mhm,
everything else is being taken away, what is it that I want to keep and hold on to no matter what?
mm.
And in doing that, I guess you could call it taking inventory.
Mhm, mhm. Yes.
You look through all your junk and it's like, okay, I love this. I kind of held on to this, but I can throw this other stuff out.
Yeah.
Yeah. Taking inventory of your values and the things that you do want to hold on to, and then reshaping your world
Mhm,
around that to say, okay,
mhm,
uh, this is the type of world for myself that I'm going to create that
mhm,
allows me to hold on to and cherish these values.
mhm,
And then that's how it started. The traveling diary came out of that. It came out of me taking a look inside and saying, I know what I value and I know what I'm going through.
mhm,
I wonder what strangers are really going through. I want to know what they're really, really going through. And and I wanted to know in a way that wasn't curated, because everything around me was curated. Like I come out of a space where pitches, right?
yeah.
You say this, you say it this way, you say it at this rhythm, you design your product this way so that it flows like this.
Mhm,
Everything was curated.
mm,
Um, I was in a place where I yearned for something that wasn't curated, that was real, that sprang
mm.
forth organically, authentically. Um,
So
yeah,
it sounds like you were looking for some authenticity as, one of the things that you valued coming out of this process of taking stock and seeing what mattered in your world and how things were fitting together. That's what I'm hearing is this drive for authenticity, but also connecting at a time when things could possibly be isolating, being an entrepreneur working in this new environment, not meeting face to face. Is that right? Am I understanding kind of what was driving you in sparking these conversations?
yeah. The thing about the authenticity is that we throw it around so much, right?
Mm,
Or just like we throw around the word community so much that is really lost. Um, it's some of its flavor.
mhm,
And I think that what I was really wanting in that moment is for um, a real human
mm,
response. I wanted humanness.
mhm,
I wanted mask off,
mhm,
makeup
mhm,
off,
mhm,
right?
mhm,
Um, and that is what I was looking for.
mhm. I think a lot of us kind of had this mask off moment or layers removed when everything was turned upside down and a reevaluating. I worry a little bit that the masks are coming back on, or that we're losing some of the lessons as more and more people are vaccinated. Some people go back to the office. Um, but I think you're not alone in that search for authenticity and coming back to a deeper sense of purpose in what we're doing. So tell me more about how that allowed you to connect with other people, because you've done this amazing project where you've linked with people all over the world, and people have been eager to participate in kind of a more authentic dialogue, written dialogue. And it sounds like you may have brought people together as well physically.
Yeah. In that space that was created with the traveling diary, what happened is I stayed there in that moment when I was taking inventory
Mhm.
that we talked about a couple minutes ago. And and I said, as I was thinking about other people and what they might have been going through, I said, I wonder what they're going through in places that don't have access to the internet, places I've never heard of. Like, what are they doing? What are women doing? What are they feeling right now? What are they
Mhm.
going through? Women that don't have support, women that do have support. What are they really going through if I could be a fly on the wall? And I started to think of ways to reach them. And I was like, I can't just reach out to folks and say, hey, can I interview you about your experience? That wasn't going to get me what I was really like yearning for. And so, given the circumstances, I thought, what if I wrote it? What if I wrote it and I mailed them this this letter or this book, that contained my thoughts on what I'm going through and what I feel, and invited them to read it and write their own if they would, and if they would send it back to me. And so I couldn't leave it. I couldn't escape it. Um, I think that that's one of the things as an entrepreneur. Sometimes you gotta see things materialize.
Mm.
It almost becomes like this addiction. Like I gotta see it materialize. I gotta see it happen. And so I couldn't let it go. It was something that haunted me really, um, and trying to figure out like what other people were really experiencing. And so, given the circumstances, I tried it. I tried it. I said, okay, let me find a stranger. And I ended up in a meeting where there were a bunch of strangers. I recognized immediately, like, I'm going to this meeting and I'm just like, and I'm there and it's like all strangers. And the idea comes back to me. It's like, here's some strangers.
I love that, because people ask sometimes, what are your hobbies? And I'm like, talking to strangers, and people think I'm nuts. I've lived all over the world in different countries, sometimes worked in remote villages where I'm the kind of walking entertainment because I'm so different, but for me, I think like you, there's this kind of puzzle, but also deep desire to connect with people in different ways. And yeah, so strangers.
Yeah.
Lots of fun, right? I mean, I say that lighthearted, but there's so much to learn. And I get a thrill out of when you find a point of connection, especially with somebody that on the surface you wouldn't seemingly have a connection or a commonality with. But
Mhm.
tell me some more about what happened when you started connecting with people, and what were the themes coming out of these kind of journal entries that were being sent back to you?
Yeah. So I found the stranger. She was in North Carolina.
Okay.
Explained to her how it would work. She got the book. She had it for 3 days. She mailed it to the next person. She takes pictures of her pages before she mails them off. And as I started to read the stories that came in, and particularly hers, the first story, I was like, wow, wow. She wrote it. She wrote it while she was outside, looking at some mountains. Where she lived, it was like near mountains and a stream. She talked about nature, and she wrote down her reflections about how her life had changed and at this time, and um, her work and her family. um, and she also shared some hopes about the future.
Mm.
And reading her entry was, for me, it was like peering through a window
Mm,
that I wouldn't have had an opportunity to peer through otherwise.
mm,
She included drawings in it,
mm,
and a feather from a bird that dropped it while she was writing.
mm,
And it was just I was like, wow.
mm,
I was blown away by it. I was like, wow, like I am privileged to read this story, this intimate story about this woman's life and how she's feeling right now. And I'm so grateful that I took the opportunity to reach out to this stranger.
mhm,
The diary continued to circulate. This started last April. We're in
mhm,
2021. This started April 2020. Um, and the different stories that it picked up along the way
mhm,
changed from person to person, handwriting to handwriting. Um, some people were focused on managing their family affairs more closely than others.
mhm,
Some shared about how the changes that were happening didn't really impact them
mhm,
as much as it had impacted others, um, and how that felt good. But then sometimes it made them also feel bad or
mhm,
guilty. Um, and they were grappling with understanding how to deal with that
mhm.
um, as well. And and then when the unrest started to happen, because this took off before all of the unrest started to happen.
When you
Um,
say unrest, explain a little bit more, especially for people who might not be here in the US.
yes. So this, when I'm talking about the unrest, I'm talking about all the protests, the global protests that started to happen after Mr. Floyd was murdered
Mhm,
in the U.S.
mhm,
This is this diary had been circulating before that, and
mhm,
so you could see how the story started to change, where people started to write more about what they were processing
mhm,
around that climate, living, being alive
mhm,
in this climate.
mhm,
And I had started sending out communications to let folks know where the diaries were,
mhm,
where the diary was at that time, and um, where it was headed,
mhm,
so that folks that had participated could follow it.
mhm,
But my heart was so broken during that time, I couldn't
mhm,
write.
mhm,
And there was a volunteer that was helping me in Canada that I leaned on. And I said, listen, I know I'm supposed to send out a communication today, but my heart is broken. I
mhm,
cannot write. Please help me.
mhm,
And she stepped in and she wrote the communications for me. She
mhm,
helped me through those hard weeks where I was so heartbroken that
mhm,
there wasn't anything that I just couldn't articulate myself
mhm,
to the community in the way that I wanted to be able to for them. So
mhm,
I'm grateful for that, because if it wasn't for her
mhm,
being a part of the community and being someone who was willingly volunteering behind the scenes in another country,
mhm, mhm, mhm,
um, and then also having the sensibilities and understanding like what I might have been feeling. Uh,
mm,
she was able to come in and help through that, and so the
mm,
stories just continued to come in all throughout that time and past that time, and they change from woman to woman because the community is so diverse.
mhm, mhm.
No one sees each other. No one has like photos or
Yeah,
avatars.
yeah.
It's just their handwriting. And
So,
yeah,
oh, I'm sorry.
go ahead, go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to point out something really important that you instinctually did, which is, an important part of kind of transforming our challenges, drawing out lessons, is often asking for support. And doing it in different ways. Sometimes it's very practical, like, can you do this thing such as write a communique? But also, in doing that, you got emotional support, you got your heartache, and I think much of the world's heartache reflected back to you or digested in a different way by seeing somebody else write about it. And it sounds like in writing about it, being supportive of, I guess, all of our humanness, basic human rights, dignity, the outrage, the heartbrokenness that so many people felt. But I think, what I've found in talking to so many people is that people have this notion of, when difficult events happen, we're going to either one, bounce back, um, and kind of get back to where we started eventually. And I think that that is really, a loss, of lessons and growth and the ability to innovate, which is why I'm so drawn to what you've done, because it is a process of growth and learning with other people. We also often can't get back to where we were before, after, or before events like a pandemic or like the, George Floyd murder. And I'm using the word murder specifically, as opposed to, kind of killing, more passive language. Many of us will never be the same. And so you can't go back. But I think there's also a misconception that we do it alone, or that this is something, that falls on each of us, when what makes part of this transformative is building our own skills, our own perspective, going through our own process of change, and then contributing it to the world, changing systems, changing cultures, changing office places, workplaces, the products or services we may offer as entrepreneurs or social entrepreneurs, but also our community. And so I just wanted to point that out, because you're doing it so instinctually, and you're doing what naturally happens in this process, which is also, asking for help.
Mhm.
um, and so, tell me, before, we wrap up shortly, about, were people afraid? Were they hopeful? Were they outraged? I'm hearing a lot about the connection. What's connecting them? Obviously the experience of being given a chance to connect in a time of isolation. But, what were the range of emotions or experiences?
Yeah, so they were, some were hopeful, some were outraged, some were um, processing.
Mhm,
A lot of processing was
mhm,
happening um, in the stories. And it's interesting to see how the writers um, and the participants, I don't want to call them writers because these are, these aren't folks that write for a living or
mhm,
um, are in the space of just all being authors, and these are just regular everyday human beings um,
mhm, mhm,
that picked up a pen
mhm,
and penned their thoughts, and it was so interesting to see how they started off one way, just talking about, maybe just talking about hearing the birds or the
mm,
cicadas outside, right?
mhm,
But then you could see how their writing changed as they started to go inward and talk
mm,
about how they were observing the world and then themselves,
mhm,
and processing their own thoughts out loud
mhm,
through ink, and landed most of the time in a place that was hopeful and
mhm,
inspiring, and that I think empowered the next participant
mm,
when they got the book,
mhm,
and they had blank pages to
mhm,
write. The women are encouraged to write for as long as they want,
mhm.
to take up as much space as they want.
Yeah.
Going back to your point about just, us having a culture where you just feel like you just got to keep showing up. It's
Mhm,
going to be over. We're going to be fine.
mhm,
Um, it was space for people to, I want to say, to bleed.
Mm,
Um, it was a space for them to come and openly, um, be, and just be, and bleed.
mhm,
There were broken hearts, there, from, not just what was happening on, in the world around us, but in their own homes,
mm,
in their families, friendships, relationships. There were
mhm,
a lot of very private, um, pain,
mhm,
points that were, and that are, shared in
mhm,
the traveling diary. And we collectively feel like we're holding space
mhm,
for all of this to exist,
mhm,
and to be honored
mm,
in a way that we don't normally get
mhm, mhm,
in the environments we're a part of.
mhm. It's so inspiring, and now, I wanna read it, I wanna be a part,
Yeah.
but I'm also interested, as we wrap up, to kind of hear what some of your takeaways have been in your own process of learning and growth. You are by nature an entrepreneur, and, thinking about what comes next for you, the impact you've had. But also, I know that when we've previously spoken, you've talked about stuff like self-care and integrating the different parts of your life better, of, being an entrepreneur, being a mother, that's at home now. Um, so do you have any kind of thoughts about, your hopes for what comes next, last takeaways of your process of learning that might help others, whether it's self-care, whether it's this work-life integration, transformative resilience, what have you?
Yeah, as I think about that, um, one of the things that I think about all the time when it
Mm,
comes to this experience with the traveling diary community, um, is that belonging
mm,
is something that we all want.
mhm, mhm,
And I feel that what the traveling diary does is it provides a space for us to all belong.
mm, mhm,
When it comes to, thinking about the future, for the traveling diary, I can't think of anything greater than that.
mhm, mhm,
I can't think of any, like, business plan or, KPI
I think
to
that's
meet that's stronger than that. Go ahead,
Yeah, I mean, I think belonging is so foundational, and I actually interviewed another woman who, came up with a project about belonging in the time parallel to which you were working. So there are kind of themes, without people necessarily being in touch, but kind of human themes coming up. And we started the conversation talking about authenticity. And I think if you came up with a business plan for the traveling diary, that it would probably take away some of the authenticity that you've been kind of searching for, and that has probably made this project so successful, and has created belonging. What about plans for yourself, and where you might take the lessons from this time, from this project? Um, it could be personal, it could be business oriented.
Yeah, I am focused mainly on, when in terms of the community, making sure that those connections are deepened within the
Mhm,
community, um, that the space that we've created in the community,
mhm,
um, is protected.
mhm,
Um, as as for me as a creator, what it does is it gives me so many opportunities to reassess my inventory.
Mm, mhm,
When you're working on something that people love so much, like
mm.
with the traveling diary, that's my son outside. He's coming home. Um, when you're working on something that people either love or hate, like with the traveling diary, you either love it or you hate it. Like it's
Mhm,
not like an in between sort of thing.
mhm,
It'll either like draw you or repel you because it's
mhm,
an experience that is so inconvenient.
mm,
It doesn't save you time.
mhm.
It doesn't save you money. It's not any of those things. It doesn't even
Yeah,
sell you on that stuff.
yeah.
Um, and you either love that or you say, "Get it away from me. I don't want anything to do with that. That's
Yeah.
crazy to me." And so I think that for me as a takeaway as a founder and thinking about the future for it, and how it presents these ways of reassessing my inventory. For me, I just want to make sure that I am, as a creator,
Mhm,
creating the space that
mhm,
fosters
mhm,
its origins
mhm,
and that maintains the
mhm,
values, that it was built upon.
mhm, mhm,
And so, like that's all that I want to do. And the things that come
mhm,
out of it, and what it becomes, those are the things that are most important,
mhm,
for me.
mhm, mhm. Well, I think there's so much inspiration in what you've done. In, I think, coming back again to our foundations and really a strong sense of purpose, what matters. And as you mentioned before, and being brought up in some of the journal entries, we've all experienced the pandemic in different ways. We all were starting out in different places with our day-to-day challenges, or the challenges of, an office job, being an entrepreneur, being a parent, what have you. And so it sounds like this has really been an opportunity for you to find your deeper sense of purpose and kind of cut away some of the stuff that's less important, but also for other people. And, thinking about the privileges that we have as individuals, the challenges, some of the societal inequities that have, led each of us to experience the pandemic differently, in addition to just, being individuals with different internal landscapes. But it sounds like it's been this transformative process for you, but also you've then kind of created this ripple effect, where you're this amazing building block because you've gone through the process of reflecting, and then you've created a space or a container for others to do that, and it keeps growing. And so I just want to applaud you for that, and say thank you for sharing about it. It's really inspiring, and I think an opportunity for all of us to come back to thinking about what matters to us, what we do with that, how we take care of ourselves, and how we go through a process of learning, but also how we contribute to the world. Because we are living in a world that is in desperate need of so much change on so many levels. And I think that this gift of a space of belonging is one of the most valuable things you could do. So
Mm,
congratulations. I don't know if
thank
congratulations is the right thing to say, but I applaud you for what you've done, and also thank you.
thank you. Thank you. And I appreciate you.
And
Appreciate you.
we look forward to hearing more about where this goes. So thank you, Kyra, and best of luck with it. And let's continue the conversation.
All right. Thank you. Take care.
Bye.